Okay. Welcome to the Parenting with Confidence podcast. I am your host, Teresa Alexander Inman, board certified behavior analyst and infant toddler developmental specialist. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of introducing you to Miss Molly DeFrank. She is the author of Digital Detox, the 2-week tech reset for kids. She helps free families from their addictions to devices. Goodness, don't we need her? Molly has a degree in international relations and worked as a press aide for former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. These days, she's a stay-at-home mom and foster mom to 6 kids ages 12 and under. Miss Molly, how do you do it?
Hey, Teresa, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you are most welcome. I'm just so excited to have you here. And thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I love talking about this issue. I love helping parents. So it's definitely a passion of mine. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. And it's so needed. So I am so glad that you have ventured into this realm to be able to help parents.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it.
Okay. So I'm just going to ask you, I mean, you and I see how bad it is, right?
Oh yeah, it's bad. It's really bad.
Yes. Give us a little into that because you've got 6 under 12.
Yes. Yeah. So I detoxed my kids from all of their devices about 3.5 years ago. I pulled the plug completely. And the reason for that is probably what a lot of your listeners are feeling. We bought in early to these devices that were sold to us. They were marketed like, oh, this will help our kids get ahead in life. This will teach them all these things they need to know. They'll be little rocket scientists. Well, one thing I didn't know, and I signed up early and often. I gave my kids the tablets, let them play on my phone, all that stuff, Netflix, YouTube, you name it. And what I didn't appreciate at the time was that the people who created this technology are some of the strictest parents when it comes to screen time. So they're selling it to us. Meanwhile, they won't let their kids near it because they know what it does to them. And over time, we started seeing, gosh, their behavioral, like these meltdowns when the screen timer dinged, the inability to pay attention, what I thought was their intense focus when they're looking at the screen is actually chronic overstimulation, and it is actually eroding their ability to concentrate. So if you've got kids, you're thinking, is this ADHD? What is going on right now? There is a good chance that they have what one psychiatrist actually calls electronic screen syndrome. So it's this situation that mimics all these other disorders, these behavioral concerns, and parents are getting these things diagnosed. Well, sometimes in a lot of situations, it's as simple as unplugging your kids, completely resetting their dopamine levels in their brain, and you can get your kids back.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of work though, Miss Molly.
I'm not going to lie. Sometimes it is a lot of work, but what I would say is that it's probably, number one, not as much work as you think it is. And number two, it is completely worth it. So for our family, when we detoxed our kids, I told my husband, like, between me and you, I can do 2 weeks of this thing because I'm going to have to be a camp counselor. I'm going to have to be like entertaining them, like putting on a show all the time because they're used to being entertained. Well, that was not at all what happened. When we broke the news to the kids, that was the hardest part. There were tears, they were upset about it. And I knew I could do this for 2 weeks. I could do it. Well, by the next morning rolled around, they knew not to ask. They knew it was a non-starter. So they didn't. And they just started using their imaginations. They started playing with the toys on their shelves. What do you know? So a lot of families that I help report that exact thing. Gosh, my kids knew it was off the table for these 2 weeks. And so they didn't even ask, and they started honing these interests and abilities that are actually going to benefit them in the long haul. And that was really wonderful. There are some families, though, in full disclosure, that say the first couple of days are rough. Mm-hmm. But once we push through that, we did see light at the end of the tunnel, and we got so much more than we put into this thing.
That is amazing. And I'll say, though, that is true for so much in life because our perception, first of all, like, oh my gosh, how are we going to ever do this? But think to when you and I were growing up, we didn't have those devices.
Oh, yeah, you're exactly right. And sometimes we even think, well, and I'm talking about myself here. I rationalized with my kids thinking, well, I played Super Mario Brothers all the time. I played Pac-Man. Like I would watch TV after school. Well, it's completely different. This is not the same thing. The devices, the games, the apps are purposefully engineered today's are by these brilliant people who have taken what we know about how to addict people to things, and they've baked addiction points into their games. And they do that by exploiting our brains. The human brain releases dopamine, that feel good chemical, that neurotransmitter, whenever we do anything pleasurable. Well, they've taken what we know about dopamine and they've baked these dopamine release points into the games and apps that we're handing to our kids. So the amount of dopamine that's getting released in the brain is so astronomically high, it can't compare to real life. So that's why if you're listening, if your kids complain of boredom, if there's not a screen involved, it's not entirely their fault. They're just experiencing this physiological difference between the dopamine released in their apps and games and the dopamine released in real life. And real life can't compete. So that's why your kids are complaining about it. Also, the meltdowns after screen time, you're watching a dopamine crash in real time. So it's not completely their fault. There's something else that has a hold on them. And as the parents, you are the perfect person to step in, take a break, reassess, and then put technology in its right place after your 2 weeks.
Mhm. Awesome. So you're not saying never technology. You're just saying, wait, first we detox, like with anything else, right? We detox our bodies from just all kinds of things, from sugar. Because when you were saying that, I thought, oh my gosh, it sounds like brain sugar. Yeah.
Totally. Absolutely. And you find too, it's like sugar's a really great analogy because if you have ever taken sugar out of your diet for any period of time, when you work it back in, some normal things that you're used to having every day, like ketchup, for example, regular ketchup that you buy, like Heinz, you taste it. If you haven't had sugar in a while, you're like, this is so sweet. I can't even handle it. But if you're used to eating it every day, you're not by it. So you're kind of just like, giving your kids a fresh start. You're setting those dopamine levels back down to zero. So now they are able to enjoy less stimulation, and they're able to troubleshoot their boredom. They're able to tolerate lower levels of stimulation. And frankly, that's kind of the real world. So rather than conditioning our kids to being entertained all day long, we're actually showing them, when you're doing this detox for 2 weeks, you're giving them the skills they need to live in the real world. Like, hey, guess what? Jobs sometimes are boring and you have to still do them. Or, jury duty is boring, or all these things, folding laundry is boring, but this is how life works. You can't just digital entertainment is not the solution to all of life's problems. And we're really helping our kids and we show them that young.
Absolutely. So true. And, you made me think of a story that a gentleman I used to volunteer with shared with me. So I live in Florida. So needless to say, hurricanes, right? And when there's been a hurricane, there is no power in a lot of cases. His granddaughter asked him if he could drive around so she could charge her phone. And he said, of course, he said, no, but granddad, he said, absolutely not. Go out there and, pick up sticks, do something, be creative. We're not
Totally.
driving around. So, yeah, so it's just crazy. Molly, have I lost you? No technology. Okay, I think you're back. I can't hear you. Okay, there we go.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the power outage because we had one around Christmas time, and my neighbors and I were texting each other. And the one thing that everyone noticed was that all the kids loved it, and they're younger. So I think it's different with teens, and digital detoxes with teenagers do look a little different than with younger kids. But the younger kids in our neighborhood, the parents said that they actually really enjoyed the time huddled around a lantern and reading stories aloud, and kind of back to a simpler time. But that's what many families will report, is that, once you get over that hump and you commit to doing this 2-week detox, this digital cleanse, that the kids even find it enjoyable. And that's what blew me away, is that my daughter, several months later, who I think she was 10 at the time, came up and said, thank you for taking our screens away. And I'm like, what? I'm sorry. What? And I couldn't believe it, because the same kids were crying when we told them about the detox. And
Right.
then meanwhile, we push through it. And later on, they're like, gosh, I learned, like, I do so many more fun things. I spend so much more time outside. And that's, I think, what it boils down to is our kids need us as parents to stand in that gap. They
Mhm.
don't have the ability to understand what they can get when they delay their gratification. They don't have that yet. And so that's where they need us to step in and say, no, we're not going to settle for the status quo of easy numbing out on digital entertainment. We're going to take a break and put it in its right place. And I know it's hard, but my encouragement to your listener is that you can do this thing. We've had parents from all different situations, single parents, work from home parents, all different kinds of parents, homeschool parents, kids with learning delays, all of these kinds of parents. You are paired with your child on purpose. It's not an accident, and you have what it takes to get them through this day and age and this digital dumpster that we're all wading through together. You can do this.
Absolutely. And I remember somebody sharing, I think Nair Ayal, I read his book, and he talked about when they were reducing his daughter's screen time, and they asked her, how long do you think you need? How much screen time sort of do you think you need? And they were thinking maybe she would say like an hour and a half, and they would have been okay with that. But she said 45 minutes. And they were like, whoa, because children are tougher on themselves than we would ever be on them. And if you give them a choice, you'd be so surprised at the responses that they give you.
Wow, that's really powerful. And it shows too, sometimes they just need the opportunities to observe the difference between having it on the table all the time and taking a break. And yeah, just like you said, you might be really surprised at what they decide that they prefer.
Yes, absolutely. And two, how much richer is conversation? Like, social interaction is. I remember my husband, I went somewhere and everybody was like this. And these were all adults. And it's just like, why are we here then?
Oh, yeah. 100%. And I did a lot of research when I wrote the book. And one of the interesting things I read was from an MIT professor named Sherry Turkle. She's done so much incredible research on this topic. But she said that employers are reporting that this first generation of kids, so the iPhone came out in 2007, the iPad came out in 2011, this first generation of kids who were raised staring at a screen, they are struggling to make conversation. They
Mhm.
get anxiety when it comes time to just have a conversation on the phone. Like they don't even know back and forth. They haven't had practice with that. And it's really interesting. And the other thing that you mentioned too about people just looking at their phone, they researched this and said that even the presence of a phone out on a table, like a dinner table, degrades the conversation because people don't feel they're not ready to get as vulnerable or go to that next level of depth with the people that they're with if they think that the other people around the table are distracted. So you're completely spot on there. It's just eroding our ability to connect as human beings, and we need that in order to thrive. We need that. It reduces stress when we have back and forth conversation with each other, and all of these things, the opportunity costs are just through the roof.
Yeah, it's so sad. It really is. And then two, not only is it eroding the social aspect of it, but when you've got that text talk, it took me so long to figure that out. People are like GM. I'm like GM. I was just like, oh, good morning. Why did you just type good morning? You know, and they're like, it's just, I don't know. I think it erodes the whole like communication on a whole. It's just really sad.
Oh yeah, 100%. And we've taken um the rich interactions between human beings that we've always had for, years and years and years, the in person, the texture of body language, and even those awkward lulls and silences in conversations. That's where we kind of hit the wall or say the awkward thing, or all of those opportunities that we've had, and we've just turned it all one dimensional and turned, good morning, I love you into GM, like that text you said. And it also is I think the scariest thing right now too is looking at the research coming out about teenagers and what it's doing to their mental health to be on these phones, these social media all the time. And we talked a little bit about the opportunity cost, but the Wall Street Journal reported recently, they were doing a series on this, and um ER visits for girls between the ages of 12 and 17 for eating disorders doubled over the course of the pandemic. Doubled. So our girls are struggling, and the researchers dug in a little deeper and they said, what's causing this? And they saw two issues. Number one is underlying mental health. And number two was TikTok body image video exposure. And so the treatment was cognitive behavioral therapy and get off TikTok. So we've taken this generation of kids who, historically, that's when we do the work of that inner work of who am I and what's my place in this world. And that's when kids need their parents most to say, you're fully known, you're fully loved, no matter what, acne, morning breath, like frizzy hair, I love you all the time. And now instead of getting that, they have to focus on putting this projection of who I am and perfection, and they're judging themselves based on the amount of likes they get. And, not that there's anything inherently wrong with social media necessarily, but we got to think about these kids when they're going on, they're so young, and we're seeing the data, what it does to their mental health. And parents, we have this unique opportunity to amp up our relational connection with our kids and show them that unconditional love. So it really is, I believe, an opportunity for parents to just dig in and roll up our sleeves. We don't have to despair. We don't have to stress out. This is why I wrote the book, because I felt like we stumbled into this solution to a problem where we amp up parental connection, give our kids an opportunity to hone their gifts and talents, and watch them flourish, watch their mental health flourish. And I'm just so encouraged by it and how accessible it is to all kinds of families.
Yeah, and again, like you said, everybody can do it. You made me think of a study though, where they found that children who were watching, were on these devices very early in life, it actually hindered brain function. Like structurally, their brains were different. And I thought, oh my gosh. So they're saying now children under 3 should not have access to whether it's a device or television for more than an hour a day, because it really impedes their brain function. And I thought, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah. And to piggyback off of that study, because I really think we're just scratching the surface on the studies here. But we've basically been experimenting on an entire generation of kids. And there was a study they did in the 90s about television watching and in early childhood, and how much it increased the risk of a child being diagnosed with ADHD later. And they said that for every hour, over an hour per day, it increased a child's risk of being diagnosed with ADHD 10%. So if they watched for 2 hours, it's 20% risk, 3 hours a day, 30% risk. Well, that was in the 90s. That was before iPads, and there was, now we've got the internet. Now there's no end to the kind of digital stimulation our kids could get. They could watch it around the clock. And so anyway, it's just really crazy. And, just to encourage your listener, because this topic can be so full of doom and gloom. I did this. If I could go back and talk to my younger mom self, I gave my kids all of the devices. It was like, I know what it's like when you wake up in the morning. We had our first 3 kids in 3 years of each other, and you're exhausted. You wake up on a Saturday morning and they're 5:45 in the morning, bright-eyed, and you're like, take my phone, enjoy, turn on the TV, whatever. So I get it. And I don't want to pretend like it's not difficult, but there's a better way. And there's a way to take this, like you talked about, how it's like sugar almost. We are basically feeding our kids a full plate of sugar when we do this for them. And then we're trying to squeeze in like a piece of broccoli, and they can't really stomach it because they're so used to this. But you can completely switch that setup to where you take it all away. Now they're enjoying real food. And then you can take that sugar, that digital sugar, back in, and then you enjoy it once in a while. It's not the main course anymore. And that's what the detox does, is it shifts your mindset as parents and your kids' mindset. They start to see they feel better, and it's just completely doable. So in this whole world of everyone talking about the doom and gloom and all the negative effects, just know that if you're listening to this conversation, you're thinking, I've been doing it wrong. Well, welcome to the club. Welcome to the club. Yeah. I mean, that's just parenting, but the good news, our kids are resilient, and the brain can be rewired, and it's not too late to change course. And these are good conversations to have with our kids. So you can do this. You can do this.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you to just kind of go back a little bit. So you said when you started, you first had the conversation with your children to say, okay, this is what's going to happen starting tomorrow. Okay.
Yes.
What was the next step?
Okay, the next step was, first of all, I was totally afraid. I was so scared. I remember thinking, why did I do this? This is going to be so hard. And the next step was we sat down and we made a list of ideas for screen-free fun. Because at this point, the kids, if your kids are anything like mine were, that's their favorite thing to do. So when you take that thing away, they're like, what am I supposed to do? My three oldest kids before our digital detox, their favorite hobbies were each a different video game. I thought that was normal. That's how most kids are. That's fine. That's what I thought. Well, now they have completely different hobbies that are really worthwhile, but it took that. It takes some time and practice for them. So what we made a list of ideas. We sat down. It's okay if you're doing this at home. If your kids are still in a funk, that's okay. You bring a good attitude and you say, let's just think, here are some things I did when I was a kid that didn't involve a screen. Let's think of ideas. What about you? What are some things you'd like to accomplish? We could go knock on the neighbor's door. You could go, have you been wanting to figure out how to do a cartwheel? You can practice that during these 2 weeks. We can get some books from the library, painting, coloring, making a fort out of boxes. You can have a pen pal, all these ideas. And you're kind of showing them, there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, we want to show our kids that they don't need something outside of their brain and their imagination. They have what they need to troubleshoot their boredom. But number two is you're making this list that you're going to then smack on your fridge. So when your kids during your detox complain of boredom, you say, oh, look, we already got ahead of this. Here's this handy dandy list. You can pick one of those things. Or you could think of something new. Or if you still can't think of anything, if you're complaining of boredom, I have several chores that need completion. So, you can put away a load of laundry if you're still bored. And usually they figure something out pretty quick at that point.
Wow, that is really cool. And some of the things that you thought of, I never would have, I was like, oh, learn to do cartwheels or, just whatever. So it's just an open list, whatever. Nothing's off the table as long as it's not a screen. And it's,
Exactly.
doable, it's safe. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fun to see. I break down the detox in the book into 4 simple steps you can remember through this acronym UNDO. You're going to undo the tech trends. So number 1 is unplug cold turkey 2 weeks. That includes TV watching. Number 2 is notice your kids like never before. You're studying your kids to see, and this isn't helicopter parenting. This isn't like follow your kids around and be at their beck and call, but you're noticing you actually want to give them opportunities for boredom. So you're noticing, well, where do they go when they get bored? What are even their weaknesses that we can work on? Because these are skills they need in life. So do they have very low frustration tolerance? Okay, we can help improve them. Do they struggle to wait their turn during a game? Okay, well, the solution to helping them with that, just like lifting weights at the gym, is more practice with that. Play more games. Encourage them when you see growth. So yeah, you're noticing your kids. You're also noticing like they're wired differently. So they're all uniquely gifted in certain areas with interests and skills and shortcomings. And as moms and dads, we have this incredible privilege to kind of be the wind in their sails. And so if you've got a kid who's really into painting, go get some books in the kids nonfiction section of the library about watercolors and all, help them be the supply, whatever you need to supply to get their brains going, to keep them moving. And then D was develop the list. And then that last part of undo is open the books. The good news that we discovered during our digital detox is that you can turn any kid into a bookworm. And I didn't believe that before. I thought some kids like to read for fun, some kids don't. That's just how it goes. Well, when you take it all away, all the digital entertainment, you can make any kid into a bookworm. And I can hear if you were skeptical of me, please know that I don't have 1 or 2 like very docile children. We have 6 kids, and it's from all over the map in terms of ability and interest. So some of my kids took to reading immediately. Some of them, it took a little bit of matchmaking. So several trips to the library, thought, well, this one's a bestseller. Do you like this? No interest. Couldn't stand it. Okay. Well, before our detox, I would have stopped there and said, he's just not into it. Okay. But I kept going and I said, well, what about like, what is he like? He loves chicken nuggets. So I checked out a book about chicken nuggets, like a chapter book. He didn't care for it. Oh my gosh. Okay. So it took like probably a couple hours cumulative before I realized, oh, the kid loves joke books. He loves nonfiction fact books and he really likes fantasy. And so now he's probably the bookwormiest kid in my whole house. So it just takes a little bit of effort, but you parents, you can help your kids on so many levels, whether it's their interests and in reading. And these are things that will benefit them forever.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you. That was such rich information that parents can actually, they can take action on immediately. So wonderful. Now, did you ever feel like pulling out your hair in that 2 week span?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And to be sure, what this isn't like a magic thing that suddenly you aren't parenting human beings anymore, like there is going to be conflict. And those are actually opportunities to help your kids work through that and give them the, conflict resolving skills they need. There's still sibling arguments, but the sibling fighting that we experienced after we took all the digital media away was so much more like we could actually navigate it. So if you're listening, you may notice if your kids are on the standard American screen diet, you've probably noticed that their fights are next level. They're amped up. It's almost like something has a hold. They're just and part of that is they're in fight or flight mode
Mhm.
because the adrenaline, the cortisol, those stress hormones are just flowing in those minds if they're playing these video games, that's what happens. So yeah, there will be conflict, but that's the world, and I think for a while we have bought into this idea that, wow, we can have like this clean, sanitize, especially Instagram does this to moms even. We think, oh, look at these pictures of these perfect homes. And we think, well, if we get the home just so clean, the kids are quiet in the other room and that, it's like quiet and peaceful and everything's perfect. And that's not a thing for anybody. Okay. That is not a thing. So we welcome those difficult moments and maybe in the difficult moment, you're not like, yes, a difficult moment. That's fine. You're normal. That's how I am too. But they are truly opportunities to give our kids the skills that they need to use for the rest of their lives.
Yes, yes, yes. And you made me think of a family who I was called to work with where they were afraid that the daughters were going to kill each other because the parents always intervened when there was a conflict. Instead of allowing them to resolve the conflict on their own, they kept intervening. So I said, listen, as long as they're not at the top of the stairs and they don't have a weapon in their hands, just leave them alone. And actually, this was like maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, I was out of a job, which was my goal. They're
Wow.
like, okay, it worked. We did it and it's done. And I was like, so if you allow them to, especially
Mm,
from, as young as they start developing the conflict, allow them to problem solve. You may want to give them some tools to help them,
yeah.
but if we continue to intervene, first of all, we don't really get to know who our children are.
Yeah.
When they're behind those screens, we still don't know we absolutely don't know who they are. And it's just really important to allow that. So yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, that the conflicts are not quite as serious because their brains aren't so activated than when they are, with those devices. So great. That should alleviate some fears for parents, I hope.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. So then so you went through the undo process and you allowed them to detox and you went through your 2 week period. How did you reintroduce the devices?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's so important because the families I help, they all they all want technology to play some kind of role in their lives, right? We don't want to banish it all forever. We just want it in its right place. It's taking up too much of the time in our home. So the first half of the book's about the detox. So if you're listening and you want it more detail, more practical help getting through those 2 weeks, the first half of the book will go into great detail on that. And the second half of the book is how to make a long-term plan where technology is working for you. And what we found is that creating a posture for how we approach technology is very helpful. So in our home, that looks like we use technology to connect with each other, watching, and examples of that is watching a movie. We like the Marvel movies. We love Lord of the Rings. We do those together. So to connect with each other or to create. So if my kids are saying, hey, we want to have a paper airplane race, can we watch a tutorial? We keep the computer in the kitchen, and so I can, it's around. I know if there's any trouble brewing, I can see it. Or I want to make a recipe or whatever. So we use it. I don't stress out when we're using technology. I don't even count it when we're using it for those things. I don't have to tally the minutes, connecting, creating. And when it comes to using technology to isolate and consume, those are kind of the stop signs for us. So a kid alone in their room on a device is not how we use technology in our home. And that posture has really changed everything. When I was a kid, probably when you were a kid alone in their room would be okay. They're resting, they're playing. But now a kid alone in their room with any device that connects to Wi-Fi is not a safe place anymore. It's not safe. They have access to everything under the sun. And so parents, we really need to be kind of mindful. It's a different game. It's a different ball game now than it was when we were kids. So it's all about putting it in its right place. And I give parents the tools to do this, and I spell that out in my book. And, everyone's long-term plan looks a little different. I think that's beautiful because your kids aren't the same as someone else's kids. And you don't have the same outlook maybe on your family enjoys as someone else. That's beautiful. I believe that God has purpose in that, in pairing parents with their kids. And so, you know your kids better than anybody else on the planet, and you know how much they can handle. A lot of times sometimes kids from trauma backgrounds who've had a lot of cortisol exposure early on, they can sometimes be a little bit more, the interactive screen time can have worse effects on them. So be mindful of that. ADHD kids, screen time, interactive digital media can put them into a bad place. And if you're listening, if you've got kids that fall in those categories, you're probably nodding along going, yeah, these kids, it affects them a little bit, affects them more than my other kids. So it's okay to have different numbers for different kids. Bring your kids in on these conversations. If they're a little bit older, talk to them with humility. If you can share with your kids, gosh, what technology is sticky for me is, this app, Instagram or TikTok. I love it in a small quantity, but when it's taking up our time to connect as a family, like I put some parameters on it share those things with your kids. They'll find that really interesting and valuable. They see they're not alone. So, I love getting into this more and you know what, for your listener too, I love what you're doing, Teresa, just helping equip parents. So, I just want to put this offer out there. If you hear this podcast and you want a copy of the book, I actually can give you a free audiobook to the first person. Just mention that you heard this on Teresa's podcast, and you can find me on my website, mollydefrank.com. But I'll send you a coupon for a free audiobook if you want that for the first person who reaches out and listens. But yeah, I love helping families.
Awesome. Thank you. And it's obvious. Otherwise, you would not have gone through this. And you could have said, oh, hey, it worked for my kids, fine, and kept it to yourself. But this is such vital information. When I reached out to him, like, Molly, parents need you. that was my body language and my, I was just like, oh my goodness, they need you, they need you, they need you, because this world is just so full of these devices, and we need to detox. We have to treat our brains, to have the same care for our brains as we do our bodies. And this is so important. So thank you so much, Miss Molly. Is there any last word that you want to share before we sign off for today?
Yeah, I just encourage you, if you're a parent or even a grandparent, you're listening, you can do this. The detox is simple. And while it maybe won't be easy, it is absolutely worth it. You will receive dividends on your investment. And come find me, mollydefrank.com. I'm also on Instagram. You can find me. I share tips and encouragement on there. And I would love to hear from you. If you detox your kids, let me know how it goes.
Awesome. Now, you said they could contact you to get the free audio. Now, how do they do that?
On my website, there's a contact form. So the first person to reach out, I will send them a coupon code for that. And then also, if you do purchase the book, if you wanted like a hard copy, it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, basically anywhere books are sold. And I have some freebies for you. So if you come to my website, if you buy the book, come to my website, enter in your, where you bought it. I have some free PDFs for you. How to convince a skeptical spouse is in there. Family dinner table topics are in there, all for free. I would love to help guide you through this thing.
Oh my goodness. And thank you, because you're not leaving any holes, which I really appreciate, because, okay, remove this, remove that, remove that. But then what do we do instead? So thank you for filling those holes, including the talking at the table. That is so important. And actually, studies have shown that when families eat together, there's less drug use, less crime, like families are more cohesive and children feel safer and they don't engage in problem behaviors to that extent. So you've taken care of it all, Miss Molly. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been my absolute honor. Oh my gosh. I don't know, maybe we could do this again. So what I'm gonna do, I honestly plan on buying your book because I want to be able to go deeper with parents, and maybe you and I can go deeper with questions that I will have about the book, and we'll come back and have another chat.
Sounds great. I'd love it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Be
Yeah, thanks,
well.
Teresa.
Okay, take care.